Today is Thursday, the 26th of October, 2017, and it is block height 491,927. Yes, yes. Shinobi, come in. Where you at?
I like 7. 7's a cool number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 7 is a cool number. And that's not like the magic number, the 8, though, is it? Do you think it's as cool as the number 8?
No.
We should have just waited one more block to go on air. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, let's come on. Let's pause it and we'll come back on at 8.
Let's do it, guys. Let's just wait. The magic number. Janine, hello. You there?
Yes, and while we're waiting for the next block to come, we could mention that we're almost at 1,000 subscribers. We're about 20 away from 1,000.
Damn you! You keep subscribing, and I keep telling you not to, and then you just keep doing it anyway. All right. Don't know what the hell you see in this show, but whatever. Acnix, come in. Acnix from the Bitcoin bus.
There's just too many subscribers. We got to dial it down a notch. That'd be great.
We have to tone down the ethics.
Maybe we'll have an argument today and chase all the viewers off.
That would be a good idea. But before we jump into the arguing, though, I did want to do my favorite thing, which is read out the comments from some of the comments that we get in our YouTube. They're right down below this video in case you didn't know. Austin Lee came in with quite a good point to the discussion yesterday about SegWit2x backers potentially having signed a contract stating, what they would do in the event of the fork. And Austin says, point of clarification, you can't have a legally binding agreement for a criminal act. The fact that it pertains to illegal action precludes it from being legally binding. That's a good point. Could have brought that up during the show, so that's fantastic. That's good input. Those kind of comments we like.
I'm not a good armchair lawyer.
Right. We need better armchair lawyers, I think. And Ashraf says, snakes have no armpits. Again, great feedback. Love the intelligent input. You guys rock. You're all brilliant. As does Roy, as does Oscar Cock. Thanks very much. And everyone in the chat right now.
Air quotes, Roy. Hi, air quotes, Roy.
Hey, air quotes, Roy. What's he saying? Did you like the comment? I didn't even properly read it. Block stream.
I think it's a weird word salad where he's trying to kind of imply that there's no interests trying to shape Bitcoin besides corporate ones, and he's essentially trying to dismiss the user base as having anything to do with anything, and just trying to paint this image of corporate groups fighting each other, which I think is pretty fallacious and pretty silly.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, maybe we can go into that when we get to the 2x segment. Now, I want to do a quick thing on this whole Amazon craze. Essentially, there was some price action today that, according to the participants in the Whalepool chat room on TeamSpeak, it is attributed to this whole Amazon speculation that Amazon was going to add Bitcoin. And this was reported in the quote-unquote Cointelegraph kind of media outlet, end quote. I don't know if you can really call this a news. I mean, it's kind of just a fucking WordPress blog or some glorified WordPress blog. It's probably not WordPress. It may be Drupal. I don't know. And it all came from, originally, it came from this newsletter, believe it or not. And the link is in the description below. And if you search Amazon, what you notice is that this dude, is basically saying in this shitty little newsletter that Amazon might take Bitcoin. And as a result, it kind of ended up getting picked up, and then it just became mimetic and it kind of went viral. Yes, Janine, you want to say something?
This is like the National Enquirer of the space. Sorry, Janine.
That newsletter wasn't saying that Amazon might take Bitcoin. He was saying, I am certain of the fact that Amazon will take Bitcoin.
Oh,
good
wow.
point.
And that
yeah.
The main cause I saw there is the rationale behind that was a letter which looked like a rejection letter to me Like one of the ones you would get, like, for your Tabasco flavored USB stick when you try and get Amazon to sell it in bulk for you, something like that.
So thanks to Raptorbit for finding this article. That was really cool. You did the work of looking into it and seeing where all that news came from. And if you've been on Twitter, you'll notice that, if you just look up Amazon Bitcoin, you'll find there's a whole bunch of speculation about it. The price kind of jumped up a bit. And yeah, this was the conference. I guess maybe I can link this. I'm not sure if this link works. You had to kind of put in a name and email address. I do encourage you, if you do end up finding this link, to just put in Satoshi Nakamoto and then put in his GMX email address that's on the white paper. That's what I recommend you do, just to, give Amazon a little hint. So we all satisfied with that fake news? I thought I'd start today with fake news. It's kind of cool when we do that. Start with the fake news.
I mean, yeah. Now we got the BS out of the way. We can argue now.
We can. All right. So you just want to go straight into this then. So Intel partners with Ledger to integrate Bitcoin wallet software and SGX tech. Now, Charlene, I think, should go first because she's written a script and a whole thing. And she can introduce the story and give us the meat and potatoes. And then we'll go into the whole calling each other names thing. All right. All right. Let's go.
I don't think we have to call each other names. I think this is, sure, it's a bit gray, but I think some parts of it are pretty clear cut. So 2 days ago, Coindesk publicized this partnership, as you see in that article, about Ledger and Intel, which was actually announced the day before that in a press release from Ledger itself on the 23rd of October. And it states that not only are they partnering, but the Ledger hardware wallet operating system will now be integrated into Intel's software guard extensions, aka SGX. And also take note in the Coindesk article that there is no critical analysis of this whatsoever because, at the very bottom, disclaimer, Coindesk is a subsidiary of the Digital Currency Group, which has an ownership stake in Ledger. And so I want to clarify that the fact that Ledger will be using Intel SGX is actually not new information, even before this article came out a few days ago. I think I pronounced his name, Nicholas Baca, aka BT Chip on Twitter. He actually included this as part of his presentation at the Breaking Bitcoin conference in September, where he showed in a slide that was titled Introducing BOLOS Enclave on Intel SGX. I do find it kind of interesting, just as a side note, I find it interesting that their acronym is literally Blockchain Open Ledger Operating System. I feel like it should be either Open Ledger Operating System or Blockchain Operating System. I don't know why you have to have both words in your acronym, but whatever. So the slide states that Intel remote attestation will be optional. The platform code and the wallet code can be validated by the user, but only the wallet code can be modified by the user. And they also offer a bug bounty for anyone who figures out how to compromise the secret data protection scheme. So that was part of his presentation at Breaking Bitcoin. Now, what we found out recently is that this slide is a bit misleading for two reasons. One, the code of Intel SGX is not open source. So having the header in that slide be open source isolation model is not correct, because if the user decides to opt into SGX, then they're using a feature that is not based on open source code, or as Nicholas Baca said, open enough for risk analysis, but then he later qualified in a conversation in my Twitter mentions today with Peter Todd that he would not consider SGX to be open source. So we've already had an open admission that Ledger will be implementing non-open source code into their hardware wallet. So that part is pretty much clear to me. Another thing the slide does not mention is that modifying the platform code and using that code on your system, the modified code, at the moment, it requires you to ask for a license on Slack from the Ledger team, and that license will only apply to a specific CPU for which Intel will have to sign your key so that you have permission to sign any modified code and then run it. So Ledger's use of Intel SGX is entirely predicated on them being given permission by Intel. And under the license terms, Intel has the right, this is a quote from their user or commercial use license agreement, where they say that Intel has the right to immediately suspend use of any SGX enclave by removing your authorization from Intel's whitelist of authorized keys. So that's something Ledger had to agree to in order to use this SGX code. So what we're dealing with here is a permission system using Intel SGX, which is deniably backdoorable. If you want to see that, Peter Todd's done tweets over at least the past 2 years about in regards to that. And there's also cool lady named, I'm not sure I pronounce her last name, it's Polish, but it's Joanna Rutkowska, and she's the founder of the Cubes project, and she's also written 2 great posts about, you know, the concerns regarding SGX. That's pretty much it. That's all I want to say. I just wanted to make people aware that it's, you know, Ledger is implementing a system that has not open source code, and it also is a permission system because it relies on Intel basically placing keys on a whitelist. That's it.
Wow, that sounds worse than I thought. So there's potentially a remote kill switch for your money built in there.
Ooh.
That's bad.
Well, I think all of us are aware. I mean, Intel has been in the headlines frequently over the years for having, you know, that kind of problem with their management engine, which for some reason is in all or most, if not all, of the consumer devices they make, and it's completely unnecessary in consumer devices if it's not for business purposes. But in this case, I don't know if there was a remote kill switch on the software itself. It's just a remote kill switch on the signing key if you have any modified software, but it's definitely a remote kill switch in terms of the licensing agreement, because if someone were to go outside of the licensing terms, then, you know, Intel could take legal action, I suppose.
Well, I would imagine that in some ways would lock down the actual ability to use the hardware.
Well, see, now here's like my take on this. I mean, obviously, this does like devolve to trusting Intel and the hardware on some levels, but like you said, you can not directly use Intel's attestation service. You can use Ledger's, and like mostly, I think what my take on this comes down to is this is kind of an expansion of the trust models that everything in the space is built on into more of a spectrum as opposed to a black and white, like a centralized service or like completely in your control. Because ultimately, like, you know, everything out there is compromisable in terms of hardware. Like the management engine that this utilizes actually has an open documented privilege escalation vulnerability, which could literally fuck with absolutely anything on your device. So when it really comes down to it, devices that are used to manage keys are compromisable, period. And
Yeah,
I think this is something that, you know, I would not advise anybody to put their long-term cold storage or serious amounts in a system like this. But I do think this does have value in adding some layer of extra security to managing hot wallets on devices. Like, I mean, for instance, like if we're moving into a world where 5 or 10 years from now, we're trying to integrate Lightning Network into all kinds of services and actually make like a monetized model for digital content, like we're going to need an increased level of security on the devices that are managing all of this, because when it comes down to it, your hot wallet is on a computer and all of our devices are completely riddled with vulnerabilities on the hardware level, the firmware level, the software level. And despite this, at the end of the day, boiling down to relying on Intel and their management engine, I do believe that what this is effectively doing is taking a virtual machine with a different instruction set and running everything through that in a lockdown section of memory. And yeah, like it does boil down to relying on Intel's technology and extending some degree of trust to them. But I do think when you're talking about hot wallets, just managing the amounts that you're spending regularly, this is an improvement from the situation right now.
I just think it's grossly inefficient. It just seems like there's much simpler ways to kind of tackle this beast. It's how about working on resolving some of the backdoors in the existing processor sets, and cleaning up the microcode, and producing more full lists of opcodes, right? And then work on something like a management engine that's not backdoored to high hell. And
Well,
like
see,
if they had gotten
that's the
some of
thing
this
though.
stuff right in the first place, maybe I could instill some trust. But this seems like a backwards propagation of trust. How is this not a backwards like propagation of trust?
Well, it's the thing. Like, in order to really fix all of the problems, like we literally need to rebuild our computing platforms from the ground up. We need to rebuild the hardware. We need to rebuild the instruction sets they use, the firmware on top of that, the software on top of that, and that's not a, a trivial undertaking. That's not something that's going to happen overnight. And in the meantime, we're going to be using the devices we have now. So I don't see it as mutually exclusive to just building everything from scratch and not using all the shit we have now, or just using
That's
what we
not my
have now
argument.
forever.
My argument is, how much did Intel spend designing SGX and the ME when they could have actually worked on making a better product?
Well, I mean, it's kind of beside the point, because we're where we're at right now. And like I said, like this, it does at its root devolve to a trust model incorporating Intel. But I
Yeah,
do
but that's
seriously believe
a
it's a
company we
strict
can't trust.
improvement versus things right now, because
Yeah, but I mean,
the
this is a company
system.
we can't trust, and categorically is
But I
broken
mean,
our
like,
trust.
that's my point. Like, this is being like painted in a black and white lens, and I don't think it's that simple, because the management engine in the CPUs that this technology counts on is there, regardless, regardless of whether something like this is built, regardless of whether your private keys are put in a lockdown section of memory and managed by that system. That system is on your device. That is a route through which your device can be compromised. And I don't see how, like, not doing this does anything to improve the security of keys on your device. And I don't
Well,
see
just go
anything that
ARM.
using
Just go
this
with an ARM
does to
processor.
strictly make that worse.
I mean, go with an ARM processor. I mean, just avoid
But again,
Intel
like,
at that
most
point.
people don't have ARM processors. The fact of the matter is that Intel is a dominant CPU manufacturer,
Doesn't
and their
IBM
chips
make some
are in devices
processors?
that people use everywhere. And we cannot just snap our fingers and have everybody throw their shit out and buy new shit at the same time. So there has to be some degree of modularity and slow steps in getting towards a better place. And I do believe that this, in a marginal way, does improve things.
Well, I
It's
think we're
just a
already
different
taking
trust
those
model.
steps, Shinobi. I think we're actually already packing, fixing those backdoors, patching code, and actually doing hardware level fixes as well on existing hardware. So, I mean, I think we're there. I think we're at that place where we have a good um, sense of security and a good kind of understanding of what security is right now, given the circumstances. And I think we can instill a small amount of trust, but I think encumbering the existing thing further with more stuff that we definitely can't trust doesn't seem to add any value to me.
Yeah, and I also think that there's a big, I mean, obviously it's very hard. It's possible, but I guess it's hard for some companies to avoid using Intel products. But I think that using Intel chips is very different from deciding to publicly align your whole company with them and to use their, you know, their whole remote attestation product. That seems, and to basically make them a trusted third party in terms of the system integrity checks. And that seems a bit off to me. And I also want to point out one thing from their FAQ for the operating system. If you scroll down to the FAQ, one of the questions is, can Intel steal my data? And I found the answer very interesting. The short answer that they provided was, not if a few non-verifiable assumptions hold. That is the most weasel worded answer I have ever heard. What is non-verifiable assumptions? They're basically saying yes, Intel can steal your data, but you won't ever know either way. Like, it may happen, it may not happen. And that's why the title of the show is Schrödinger's Backdoor, or at least part of it is. And also, there's a thread from Peter Todd that I think was shown earlier, because he's been looking into SGX a lot, at least in the past 2 years especially. And he's actually talked to people from Intel, and specifically the Intel SGX team, who have said that the SGX code and the licensing especially can be used to track people, because Intel apparently knows all of the people who are using SGX. So yeah, it's also a way to de-anonymize people.
Yeah, I mean, you see that slick clip in Mr. Robot where they show the computer and they hack into it. Like, that is the type of access that the ME technology allows. It's basically running a full virtual machine in parallel to your existing machine that can basically do whatever it wants. It's basically like a little, you know, wipeable remotely virtual box that can spy on you and light up all your hardware. Do whatever it wants, basically.
Yeah, but like again, this comes down to the trust models. And I mean, you would have to have this multi-billion-dollar company intentionally start issuing like firmware or microcode updates, like mismanaging your like there would be fingerprints. Like this would be found by somebody somewhere if Intel started doing this, and that would completely and utterly destroy them as a company if they were busted red-handed manipulating this. And again, like this is it's a different trust model. Like Bitcoin is an opt-in system, and at the end of the day, people can do whatever they want within the confines of that system. And for this, the same way that you're free to not use something like this, I'm free to use it if I choose, and there's really nothing you can do about it. And like that's what I'm trying to get at here, is to recognize the spectrum of trust models involved here. And like I think that this is a marginal improvement for hot wallet security if this is implemented correctly, and Intel is not some shady company that was started just by the CIA to backdoor all computers everywhere.
Well,
and I mean, like
it's a government, it's a heavily government funded company at one point, at least. Anyway, don't they by law actually have to have the keys, you know, kind of accessible to law enforcement on one degree or another? I believe they do. So, I mean, that kind of does open you up to a lot of vulnerabilities, especially when we're talking about money, which I believe this may have actually been one of the reasons why we didn't have money on computers earlier. Right?
Well, one, I'm not sure if that's true, and two, like you can't just say that a legal situation involving management of data will translate one-to-one with the management of people's money. Like that is a whole different legal one.
I'm saying that it's a direct correlation that needs to be associated because that power and control mechanism exists.
Okay, yeah, let me just clarify. So let me just clarify something. So because there's been a lot of issues brought up, I want us to just be a bit grounded in what this story actually is. Are we saying that Intel is going to be using Ledger's technology, or is it Ledger's going to be using Intel's technology?
Ledger is going to be implementing their operating system on Intel's SGX platform. So they're taking their software and applying it on Intel's platform.
Right. Okay. But obviously this looks good for Intel, and we see this happen a lot when, you know, in the space where companies come up with these press releases to generate headlines so that they can get traction and news stories written about it. We already saw from the Amazon story that the journalists out there, they're desperate journalists out there, are desperate for clickbait. They're desperate for articles and clicks and all of that stuff. And the internet is just, you know, has infinite, you know, desire for just, you know, all this time spent online and people clicking on things, and if they can get those views for that advertisers, that's great. So with that in mind, I want to understand what Ledger products is this going to affect. Is it going to be the whole line, like the Nano S, and or is it just going to be like the Blue? Are people going to be able to opt out of this, you know, Intel processor?
Well, you have to opt in. Like that's the point that I'm trying to make is utilizing this to manage your private keys is totally opt-in. Like
Okay,
there is
fair
nothing
enough.
anybody can do to force
But are
you
they,
to use
is
it.
there going to be a product line? Like what I mean is, like if I want to use Ledger because maybe I do like the software and so on, do I have to choose? Can I choose, or are they just exclusively going to offer Intel?
No, it would just be for a certain class and up of Intel processors. This would be something available that you could use as software. Like you would be able to run the software in that special environment.
Okay, and Charlene, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so this is part of a product line. It's going to be part of Intel's product line. And even in the press release that Ledger did, there was actually a quote from the vice president of Intel saying how happy they were that they were going to have Ledger contribute to Intel's blockchain scalability, I don't know, repertoire or whatever. And so SGX is going to be present on these Ledger hardware wallets, regardless of whether you want it to or not. The part that's opt-in is whether there's remote attestation.
I knew
But
it.
SGX is going to be there regardless.
It's a first to bro down scenario. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it.
Right. Can you also define what a remote attestation is for those who don't know?
It's effectively like verifying the integrity of the code you're running by making sure that things check out against keys that somebody's actually like signing or guaranteeing that data with. It's pretty much a check to make sure that the code you're running is what you should be running.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of, like we were talking earlier today, I had a really good conversation actually with Daknix earlier. I don't think, Shinobi, you were still sleeping, maybe because you've been up really late. But we were talking about the possibility of like actually running an ARM processor on a single board processor would actually be in theoretically more secure as long as the user knew what they were doing. The fact is that nowadays we do trust these companies with our security decisions a lot. And I have to say that Trezor and Ledger have both done a really good job so far of getting the usability so relatively, like I know like a lot of newbies looking at this would be thinking, hang on, this isn't easy, but actually compared to what we had before, I think this is a replica of exactly the same arguments that we've had before with Swapman, where Swapman was telling Mr. Hoddle, you know, these things are just toys and they're really insecure and they're not thoroughly tested and they could be backdoored and all this kind of stuff. And I was saying the same thing as you, Monkey. I was saying this is a better situation than what we currently have with people storing their private keys on their phones and their laptops, which, you know, clearly aren't, you know, ready. So it's better just to get ourselves a little bit further ahead if we can get, you know, more people, because how many Bitcoins right now have been taken out of supply, you know, just because of, you know, user stupidity. And like, what happens if 50% of the coins just end up being unspendable because they all got lost? I mean, what would that say about us, you know, as a society?
This is what I was touching on with the backwards propagation of trust, right? We've already begun to establish trust models with things like the Odroid, the Arduino, and like the Raspberry Pi. Like we understand how they compute. We know that there's, you know, it's very unlikely that there are backdoors still at this point, right? But, you know, we're still constantly peer reviewing that stuff. But, you know, imagine applying something like Intel's management engine or software guard extensions in a much simpler manner to something like that. Now you have something where it does add value. And I don't see in the Intel version of that it is adding value because we haven't done the steps that we've done on things like the Raspberry Pi. That's why I see it as backwards propagation of trust. We're providing trust in the wrong way to top down from the largest company. That's completely antithetical to how Bitcoin works. Like, we'd like to start at a small company like Raspberry Pi and verify upwards, right?
Yeah, so the advantage is of using a single board processor is that, relatively speaking, we've all inspected this hardware. It's quite easy to inspect. It's ubiquitous. Lots of people use it already. And also with the Raspberry Pi 2, it doesn't come with any wireless capabilities. So you can be, you know, pretty sure on a spectrum of doubt that that thing is not going to have, you know, any kind of connection with the device without, you know, physically being plugged in. If you're super paranoid, you know, you can unplug the Ethernet card and, you know, physically rip it off the board. And we talked earlier about even creating a mechanical computer, like a Babbage style computer for generating Bitcoin keys. You know, you can actually create computers at, you know, in very thick books, you know, where you do this and then you go to this page and then you circle this and you have a sheet of paper and you're doing all the checksums, you're simply doing all the, you know, do all the things that a processor would do. And your brain is like the RAM, and the piece of paper you're writing on is like the hard drive, and the book is like the CPU with all the gates, right? All the logic gates. So like in theory, you could come up with a single purpose computer, which all it did was, you know, you roll some die, you produce the entropy, it will give you, you know, the BIP39 seed, and then you'll need also a series of functions that will help you, you know, select the derivation path, therefore give you the private keys. Then you need the ability to produce the public keys and the private keys. That's how you're going to send any Bitcoins to it, with just the mnemonic, or just actually, I should say, the master private key. And as a result, you sort of get yourself in a situation where you have no need to touch an electronic device, let alone whether or not it's got Wi-Fi. And then if you want to secure that seed, you can put it on something like a crypto steel, or as I think Doringo and Jans were pointing out earlier in the chat, in the Bitcoin Mumble, you can just get a hammer kit. I think also, yeah, Aknix, you were talking about getting a laser cutting device, which you can get relatively cheaply now, and just get your own steel, get your own stainless steel, make it maybe thicker than the crypto steel, whatever you want, and then you can just bash the key. You can just like get a mallet, you can hammer it in, or you can laser etch it, and then you can just, I mean, this thing can just like be in plain sight, you know, and you can obviously use the 25th word on your Trezor or the advanced passphrase if you've got a Nano S on the ledger side, to you basically put all your Bitcoins in a private part of that message space. And that way you can just leave this thing in plain sight and someone can find it. And it's like, well, first of all, it kind of blends in, especially if you've got a workshop or something with lots of metal in it. You can just leave it on the shelf and nobody even knows it's there. And then, you know, we can enter this kind of world where we're not always plugged in, you know. Anyway, I'm rambling. Janine, you had a point about the remote attestation.
Well, I just wanted to give a better definition. This is just from the Wikipedia page, but it matches with what I know about it. So remote attestation is where it basically protects against unauthorized software from being used on other computers. And yeah, but what I really wanted to point out is that Trezor has actually taken a different direction, and I wish Ledger would have considered this too, which is that instead of implementing a secure enclave, they have decided to actually physically separate the cores in their hardware. So they could have gone Ledger could have gone with that route. It's entirely possible. And I think that not only does not rely on a trusted third party like Intel at any level, but I think it's also a lot less complicated. And I think, you know, the fact remains that it doesn't really matter whether Intel is good or evil or somewhere in between. It really doesn't matter, because the fact remains that this is still a permission system that is being implemented as permission system that relies on Intel accepting Ledger and not canceling their license out of nowhere. Like, to me, that's a huge concern. Like, why would you want to give over that much power to a company like that? And so I don't want to support permission systems. So it doesn't matter whether I think Intel is good or bad or somewhere in between. You know, I don't want the whole point of Bitcoin was that you don't trust anyone. It doesn't matter how good or bad you think they are. You don't do a permission system. You do it permissionless.
Well, yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, like, just add a little last thing. Like, you can't stop people who want to use things in that way. I mean, like, all the people out there who have their coins on Coinbase because they're not up to par to actually secure them in their minds. Like, that, you can't stop them from doing that. And this offers us a different spectrum for them to move towards actually managing things more themselves.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we should ban Ledger or ban Coinbase. I'm not for that at all. My whole purpose for making this a big topic on the show was to make people aware of what they're agreeing to when they use the system, because even when you say, oh, the SGX, the remote attestation part of SGX is opt-in, Well, how many users are going to opt into that not knowing what that actually means? Like probably a lot of them. They're going probably in the UI, they're going to say this is going to make you feel safer about your system integrity, and they're not going to mention the downsides to that. And they're not going to say this might be better in certain situations, like for a hot wallet setup than, you know, for a cold storage system. I doubt that Ledger is going to make those kinds of distinctions and expand on those gray areas.
Yeah, I think it sets a bad precedent, you know, and I'm someone who, like, I'll always store my coins on Coinbase before I store them on something like that. I'll put it that way.
Wow.
Well, what if Coinbase is using it?
Yeah, what if Coinbase are running on Intel
Oh,
processors?
correct.
All right, we got to move on because that is a big ass topic we just covered, and I'm sure we'll return to it later on in the season. So, bank system better at tracking illegal activity than digital currencies like Bitcoin, says Bank of America CEO Moynihan. Who wants to take this one? Go on, Monkey.
Well, I mean, I think this is kind of a really silly thing to say, especially with how prevalent we have chain analytics companies all over the place. And I mean, like we covered, I think a couple of weeks ago, the IRS actually contracted with a chain analytics company back in 2015. I think before they issued the subpoena for Coinbase for their customer data. And like I think this really illustrates that like these people still don't know what the heck they're dealing with. Like they're just scrambling for rationalizations as to why their system is superior, why their way of doing things is better, or how like, and it's not the case. Like unless you take very proactive steps that really do take a higher skill level than most people who own Bitcoin have. Like it's not really that difficult to track things down and tie your coins to you. Like you're buying them somewhere, and that tags your ID to it. Every transaction from that is linked. So when you get more metadata to add to that, you can distinguish when those coins are leaving your possession and which ones are remaining in your possession. And it's not this perfectly anonymous system.
Right. And I would also point out that at the moment there's a bit of a chasm with law enforcement's general competence and understanding of these kind of cryptocurrencies. I mean, if you just went to the police locally and said, oh, I've had my Bitcoin stolen, I highly suspect they're not going to take you very seriously. They're not going to have the resources or the manpower that the experts actually know about it. Whereas if you get your credit card stolen, oh, sure, you know, they have the tools already to deal with that. There's a whole insurance industry that will come to the rescue and give a payout. And of course, the bank in the meantime is paying, you know, the excess and is paying the, you know, the fees for that insurance product. But there is no such thing, you know, for Bitcoin. I also wanted to point out in that article, I just had the screen share up when I started talking, the highlighted quote there: Bitcoin transactions are encrypted and recorded in a permanent online ledger called the blockchain. They encrypted? I didn't know there was encryption in Bitcoin.
Maybe Monero.
The quality, well, no encryption in Monero either. It's just mixing. It's ring CT. I mean, it's just signatures, isn't it? I mean, yeah. So again, just dodgy journalism and people not really understanding it. I mean, I remember working on news desk back in my early days, and the strictness of, you know, how good the report research should have been, and you know, they were so on the ball with the reporting. They were so on the board with fact finding and fact checking and making sure that we were saying absolutely the right thing. Nowadays, no one gives a shit what they say. It's like, it's because the information is so ephemeral now. It moves so quickly. People have such short memories that you can say whatever the fuck you want, and it's fine. No one's going to remember this anyway. And it's like, I think history will remember. I mean, you can change the article later or something, and it just gets lost in the morass of information. But nobody, you know, none of these outlets care about their reputation. That was just a really bad oversight. They should have had an expert internally that was looking into that. Right, moving on, because that wasn't a particularly interesting story, to be fair. Neither is this one. Peter Thiel says that people are underestimating the great potential of Bitcoin. Says the billionaire.
Quick, buy
who's invested in
Bitcoin.
it.
Some rich guy, he's pumping
Yeah.
Bitcoin. Quick, everybody buy it.
Yeah. You got anything on this?
I think it was interesting. I believe this. He made these comments in Saudi Arabia. I just think that was interesting with the prince's statements the other day.
Yeah, I just want to, like, I'm really tired of all the fanboying in this community around Peter Thiel. I'm going to bring up really quick a tweet that I did about it before, but I just want to remind everyone that Peter Thiel created a company that's called Palantir. It's a surveillance company, and it provided software to intelligence agencies. I don't know how many times I have to remind people of that, but it seems like people keep forgetting, and they think he's such a great person. And so when he comes out and says stuff like this about Bitcoin, it's like, I really don't care. Like, he's not the type of person that I want to get praise or be praising Bitcoin or get praise from. Because I'm sorry, I'm not interested in people who are responsible for building a company that makes surveillance software.
Well, it's more than that. Like he has the the software and the location facilities and runs it that ties into like 5 of the largest, government databases out there. So like NSA.
Wait, so he's a bad man?
Also, he trades off that information, right? So he's also insider trading off of potentially, secret information. Go figure, right? Like, talk about a news story.
So he's a bad man that's spying on us.
Peter Veal, man. Peter Red Meat Veal.
Well, he's not only spying on us, but he's helping ICE to deport people from the US. So yeah. Great guy.
There's not many powerful people in the world that actually hold on to their ethics.
Yeah, I'm just watching the video because apparently he made more good points, but has great potential left. Or maybe there's another video. But okay, we have a question in the chat from Max Kaiser, not the Max Kaiser presumably, but a Max Kaiser. And he says, if you knew for certain that Bitcoin was evil, would you still accumulate it for personal benefit? That's a good question. He wants to take it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'd like to say that I wouldn't, but I mean, I think I would. It really just comes down to like individual self-interest. And I mean, like at the end of the day, that's what makes this whole system work. I mean, I see a bunch of amazing good that this technology can do for the world at large. I see so many positive social changes it can initiate. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that I'm here trying to encourage that stuff now. When I first came in the door, it was because, I can make money. And like, I really think I would. Like that's just the root of what makes all of this work in the first place, whether it's good or evil.
Aknix, would you buy Bitcoin even if you knew it was evil, but it had all the other properties? It was still going to go to the moon. You were still going to get your bro down.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd totally buy evil shit if it's going to kill the evil. It depends what the end means is, what the end goal is, right? If I can promote up and out on evil, yeah, sure, why not?
All right, I'm gonna go with if I can get a Lambo and a small mansion. I'm modest, not going to be greedy. There's a lot of evil I would tolerate for that. But seriously, I think I was saying earlier in a conversation that people have made comparisons to Bitcoin with communism before, how communism spread across the globe. It was this kind of distributed idea, and there were books published. And when the colonialists were leaving Africa, you had several African nations that were starting to adopt it. The idea was spreading like a virus, right? And the people that believed in this philosophy and its various guises across the world, often had to flee, from America that was going after it because it was a threat to American style capitalism, and it was, you know, a political fight. But whenever they had to leave, they had to fly off to these kind of like Cuba or South Africa or somewhere that, you know, was sympathetic to communists, right? And it kind of reminds me of how Bitcoiners talk about how they're going to, you know, go to an island like, okay, if I'm forced out of America, it's fine. I'll just find some jurisdiction that's sympathetic to my particular views. And I think you always have to remain self-reflective and always question, and don't just like love something, you know, even as Bitcoiners, we always have to reflect. We always have to look at this thing. I mean, it's potentially very dangerous because it's an autopoietic state transition system that, once begun, is very, very difficult to stop and change. And so we better be absolutely sure that the rules we instill in it and any of the changes that we make are the right ones, right? The right ones, maybe the right as in the way Aristotle meant it when he was talking about ethics, as in the good. And that's how I mean it. I don't mean like, you know, the right way that we know that right way. I'm saying there is such a thing theoretically, abstractly, as the right thing to do, but perhaps we'll never know what it is. But that's the way we should orientate ourselves. And yeah, I think there's a lot of people in Bitcoin that are very unreflective and just like they believe in this thing. It's like a religion now, and they're never going to be persuaded otherwise. Even if you can show them incontrovertible evidence, they'll still keep shilling it. They're just unthinking, and they're part of the echo chamber. And it leads into a whole other thing that we could talk about another time, which I was ranting on about on the chat before we came on air, about the doomsday scenario, and people were kind of feeding back on that. So we'll do that one another time, I promise, because that is a very good kind of rabbit hole to go down. All right. So last up, there's another country that wants to ban Bitcoin. Oh my God. And it's Algeria.
How are they going to do it?
Algeria wants to ban. Well, this leads into the conversation we were having on the chat before. I don't want to go into it. Do we want to go into it? Because it's a big
I want to ask a smart ass question. If somebody in Algeria makes a multi-sig wallet with me and puts all their Bitcoins in it, do they own Bitcoin? Are they in possession of that Bitcoin? I want an answer, Algeria.
Yeah. So this is kind of under fake news, the fake news section. We started with it. We're ending with it. I don't believe any of this crap. I tried reading it. It was just, I don't know, newsbtc.com. Who gives a shit? It's just, look at it. It's just another clickbaity site where they put all this clickbait around you. It's like, yeah, click on this, click on this, click on this, stay on the website. Oh, look at that. Does anyone ever use any of these things? The fucking share buttons. Have you ever used?
No.
These are just used to track you. That's the only reason they're there. It's so Pinterest and LinkedIn and Reddit and the only incentive is that web hosts and, you know, webmasters want to install it on their fucking Drupal plugins and their WordPress plugins, because it's like a plugin that they can just one-click install, and it's like, oh look, we're social, sharing is caring. And nobody ever, what do? You copy and paste the link. Of course you do. That's what everybody does. Wrecked.
It's good for your SEO.
It's good for your SEO. It's good for your bro down. All right. Final thoughts. Sorry, I'm a bit overexposed right now. Let me fix that. Final thoughts.
I want an answer, Algeria. Where's my answer?
We can go into this another time. I've got a video in mind, like a pre-scripted one called Doomsday. Shanin.
Yeah, so as we mentioned at the top, or as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're close to 1,000 subscribers. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Andreas Antonopoulos because he just reached 50,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel. And so,
wow.
Yeah.
Nice shill there for Andreas.
And, yeah, my final thought, Intel, not so much. Like the Ledger, but I don't know if I'll be buying any more Ledger products.
Evil Inside, as somebody said in the chat. Evil Inside. Like, that should have been the title of the show. We should have put that on the... Yeah, damn it. We have to do that again. We'll have to do another show about Intel. Charlene.
Yeah, and I also wanted to, because at the beginning of the show, when I was talking about the Intel stuff, people were asking whether I was about to cry because my voice kind of cracked up, and that's because when I talk for a long time at a speed faster than normal, then my voice gets a little weird, and so that's happened before. People think that I'm about to cry when I'm talking, but I'm fine, I'm not. That's just my voice being bad.
No,
Bad
she is
voice.
crying right now. She started crying just then, I think. Yeah. You can probably hear her in the background. She's not crying. She's laughing. All right. Okay. I want to say something I've forgotten. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, about the subscribers thing. So if you're watching the show and maybe you're thinking, I don't know, this show isn't as good, I don't click on it as much anymore, maybe you should unsubscribe. Click the unsubscribe button below. Don't forget to dislike the video. But remember, only if you want to. Bye for now.